What is up? Welcome back to another edition of the PFF podcast. I'm Mike Renner. Joining me, as always, Sam Monson. If you've been listening to the podcast by now, you probably know about it, but we're going to remind you anyways because the marketing team is making us. We have this year, the first time ever, we're giving away signature stats for this entire draft class. Go to profootballfocus.com/draftpass17, and the old premium stats that we used to have for the NFL, we're giving away now for college. We have drops, missed tackle rates, pressure rates, coverage numbers, all that sort of stuff. You can find it in the Draft Pass. It's a cool new tool that we're offering. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you're interested in the draft at all, I'm sure you'll get your money's worth for that package. So profootballfocus.com/draftpass17. But we're not here to talk about the draft, Sam, are we? We're talking about free agency, and we're right now recording this at Monday afternoon, 4 days into free agency, and it's basically over. All the good players are gone. It's been one of the least eventful free agencies I can remember at my time at PFF, and it's basically complete. If you're looking for a starter on your team, you probably cannot find one at this point.
I mean, all the good players were gone like Thursday afternoon. It was a couple hours after it officially opened, it was done. I mean, there was a bunch of moves still getting made, but so many of those were the under the radar, the lower down the depth chart guys. The cream of this crop just went in a heartbeat. It went in the legalized tampering period. There was so few top quality players that actually hit the open market, and those that did went pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, I mean, just looking through our list of top 10 free agents that we put out this morning, you have guys like Terrence Newman in the top 10, who's 38. You have Nick Mangold, who's, almost done with his career as well. There's not even 10 guys left who are going to be quality starters or you can rely on to be starters for the next 2 to 3 years on your team. So it's really over. So with free agency being in the books, we can basically review it at this point. We can say who were the winners, who were the losers, and we'll get right into it with the 5 best deals of this free agency period. I'll start it off. I'll kick it off. I think at number 1, the best deal that I saw, when you look at the tackle market as a whole, and what this guy got, I think it was a steal, and that's Andrew Whitworth, 3 years, $33.8 million for the Los Angeles Rams. And the thing about that deal is it represents a absolutely massive upgrade over what they had at the position. So not only is it a good value for the signing, it's a huge upgrade from Greg Robinson, who was one of the 5 worst left tackles in the NFL last season.
Yeah, I mean, look, Andrew Whitworth, the only negative in his game at all is the fact that he's 35 years old, and that scares teams. But if you look at what he's actually doing, the guy is playing the best football of his career. He's still an elite left tackle. We had for the first time, Nathan Yankee put together this metric that looked at the past 3 years of a guy's play and calculated what they should be earning, the contract they should get on the open market based on how well they've been playing. And even with just a 2-year contract, we put it in that, look, at 35 years old, the best he's going to get is a 2-year deal. But that metric said that Andrew Whitworth should be earning $38.4 million over 2 years. He's earning less than that, $4 million less than that over 3 years, with only half of it guaranteed for the Rams. So even with that kind of price they paid for him, they're getting a massive steal given how well he's playing at the moment. I mean, his play says that he should be the best paid left tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, and it's funny that he gets this low deal probably because he's not going to get any better at this point, but also because of the inherent injury risk that people feel like you have when you're signing a guy that old, 35 years old, Whitworth. But then guys who have legitimate injury histories like Matt Khalil and Russell Okung at tackle don't get that sort of injury bump just because they're younger, even though the course of their career suggests they might get injured. They may very well be injured again in the near future. So I think that deal is hands down the best I saw in free agency. And it's not so much guaranteed to where if he has fallen off a cliff in 2 years that you can't cut him in year 3. So I think that's easily number 1 for me. Any disagreement there on your list, Sam?
I do like that deal. And like I said, I think they've got a steal. I don't even know if it's an injury concern that scares teams. I think they just fear the year that those guys fall off a cliff. You go from being good 1 year to the next year, you're literally non-viable. You can't be on the field. So I think teams just fear being on the wrong side of that year where that inevitably happens. But I think, yeah, it's definitely a steal given the tackle money that was flying around. I think my favorite move of the entire free agency period was Chris Baker going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Apparently, he tweeted out that I think he said that Washington didn't extend him an offer, or that Washington weren't interested in bringing him back, which was something of a surprise to me. But the deal that he signed for was almost nothing. He signed for 3 years, $15.8 million with 9 of that guaranteed. The Bucs have been looking, basically since they drafted Gerald McCoy, for a guy to play alongside him as that kind of nose tackle in that 4-3 system. And they've cycled through a whole bunch of players, and none of them have been able to do it. I think Baker is probably the guy.
Yeah, I really like that deal as well. I wouldn't go high as to say it's number one, but they got in terms of value, only a little over $5 million a year for him, who's one of the, legitimately, top 5 or so nose-ish tackles in the NFL right now. Provides actually something as a pass rusher, as opposed to a lot of the nose tackles in the NFL who are up there don't really get much done in that realm. So, yeah, I mean, that has to be one of the best deals right now. And he's not at 29 years old, you don't think he'll, over the course of that contract, be, he's not going to fall off a cliff anytime soon, I wouldn't think.
No, I really like that deal.
Agreed on that one. I had at number 2, I had Brandon Marshall, 2 years, $11 million to the Giants. He has the type of game to where he's not going to age poorly. I would say, he doesn't rely on speed so much to get open, somewhat similar to Anquan Bolden in how he could, be successful well into his mid-30s. So I think pairing him up across from Odell Beckham is a ridiculous deal for them at 2 years, $11 million.
Yeah, that's my number 3 move. I've got that in the top 5 as well. I love the fit there. I think it's great. You only need to turn on the tape of him beating up Richard Sherman this past year. Nobody does that to Richard Sherman. That's the first guy I think I've ever seen who has physically overwhelmed Richard Sherman in a one-on-one battle as long as the officials have let them play. And he just killed him. I mean, he scored one touchdown, one of the 2 touchdowns that Sherman gave up all season, beat him deep down the right sideline for another big gain that would have been like an 80-yard touchdown if a safety hadn't been coming across to cut it off. I mean, he really gave Sherman everything he could handle. So I think you just have to assume that the quarterback situation in New York was the biggest factor in his downturn, not Marshall himself.
The thing is, that might not get better with the Giants, though. That's the only problem.
It's got to get a little bit better. Even Eli's not that bad.
It can't get worse, but it might not be substantially better. So we'll see. Still love the deal, though. I still think with all those weapons there, that offense can't be as bad as it was last year because it was pretty anemic a season ago. But that was my number 2 deal. Number 3, I had J.C. Tretter to the Browns. I said this going in. He was probably going to be one of the best value signings in my mind. I think that held true. 3 years, $16.8 million. That's a steal if he plays like he did last year for an entire season at center for them. I think that's easily one of the best deals, especially when you consider the offensive line money flowing around the rest of the league.
Yeah, I've got that one at number 4. I think it's a great fit and a great signing. The Browns desperately needed center help last season with Cameron Irving in there, stinking it up. I mean, it's interesting. It is a great value deal, but part of kind of looking back to that Chris Baker deal again, Tretter essentially signed for $1 million more total and $1 million more guaranteed. And I would say that Baker is a significantly more proven entity than JC Tretter is. I think both of them will end up proving to be an absolute steal, a bargain in terms of the contract they signed. But I think it just reinforces how good a value that Baker deal is.
I definitely agree there, even though I left Baker off my top 5. Number 4, though, I had Terrell Pryor, 1 year, $8 million. That's very reasonable money for a starting receiver, considering that guys like Kenny Stills, Kenny Britt, other guys were getting $8 million a year over multiple years. You get Pryor, probably the second best receiver on the market this year, for $8 million 1 year in Washington. I don't see how that's not an upgrade over Pierre Garçon.
Yeah, so this is my number 2 deal. I love this deal. I'm on something of a Terrell Pryor kick at the moment. Look, we talked about this going into free agency, and we were saying that with all the money the Browns had to play with, if they let Pryor hit the open market, it was going to be a big mistake. And not only did they let him hit the open market, they were kind of proved right in that he wasn't going to get the giant contract that he and his agent were looking for. So he ends up getting an offer of 1 year, $8 million. He can try again next season if he has another really good year. And it was initially reported by Cleveland.com that they didn't even give the Browns a chance to offer it. Cleveland.com later changed that and said, actually, they did come back to the Browns and they said, right, we have an offer of 1 year, $8 million on the table. Because the Browns apparently were offering the same 4 years, 32. So they were offering $8 million for 4 years. But they reckon they could get better than that if they sign a long-term deal in a year's time. So they just wanted the 1 year. It came back to Cleveland and offered them the chance to better it. And instead of bettering it, Cleveland actually took away the old offer and offered them even less. And basically just said, no, we're not having that. So this at this point was after they'd given some significant money to Kenny Britt. And they do have a bunch of young receivers in-house that they drafted last year, presumably a couple of which they would like to work out long-term. But that strikes me from kind of start to finish as being a bit of a mistake. You now have got this receiving core that's headlined by Kenny Britt. You've got last year's rookie Corey Coleman, to be the kind of number 2 guy with the upside. And then you're going to see what you have with the rest of those young guys to try and be number 3 and number 4.
Don't forget Josh Gordon.
Josh Gordon, who presumably is going to get traded or won't be there at some point, but whatever. Yeah. I just think moving from Pryor to Britt is a big downgrade given Pryor's ridiculous upside. I mean, we're talking about a guy who we all knew was an athletic freak, but with essentially 1 year of playing receiver, had 1,000 yards with 6 different quarterbacks throwing him the ball. And if you look at his tape, he made some big plays against some really legit corners. So, and I think the same thing is kind of true with Britt. He had this 1,000-yard season with, terrible Rams situation there. But Britt is he's been in the league for 8 years playing receiver. He's not getting better next year. Pryor could be dramatically better next year. And if that happens, I think you've made a fairly significant mistake letting him go and sign Britt as his replacement.
Britt is only a year older than Terrell Pryor at this point.
Yeah,
he's been in the league forever, but
for 8 years.
He's been playing wide receiver for
literally this time a year ago, we were talking about Pryor as a guy that probably wouldn't make the Browns roster.
No, I can't. I can't get on board with the Browns' strategy there. I will say I agree that Kenny Britt probably is worth. They didn't overpay for Britt. I think that's a solid money deal for him.
Yeah,
but if you could have got Terrell Pryor too at the same range, you still have $67 million in cap space, right? Or $62 million in cap space. The Browns right now. I don't know what else you're going to do with that, but get as many weapons as you can for a young quarterback, even if it is on a 1 year deal. I don't.
Well, can't
get on board with them letting him walk.
We're going to get to what else you're going to do with it soon.
Okay. Oh, okay. Little hint there towards later in the show. A little nod. All right. Number 5, my last deal. I thought Martellus Bennett at 3 years, $20 million was a pretty solid deal for the Green Bay Packers, especially when it sounded like Jared Cook was asking for more. And I don't think anyone would take Jared Cook over Martellus Bennett even at this point.
No. I think that's a good deal. I don't hate that deal at all. I have an elevated level of respect for Martellus Bennett given how he was playing busted up all through last season. He got hurt, fought through it the entire year, still made some big plays, definitely tailed off, but I think that was impressive. My number 5, though, was Alshon Jeffrey to the Philadelphia Eagles for 1 year, $14 million. I mean, Jeffrey is a guy with so many question marks about him in terms of injury history, availability, how long he's been at his best for, that a 1 year deal is perfect for a team trying to kind of figure out if he's the guy. And Chicago didn't want to pay him the franchise tag, and the Eagles have ended up getting him for substantially less than the franchise tag for that 1 year deal. If he tears it up this season, they get to sign him to the big extension they didn't feel comfortable with this season. So I think that's a great bit of business.
No, I like that one as well, for sure. I'm going to talk about that one a little later, but let's get right into what grinds Sam's gears then.
Oh, man. So I've kept it football related, but I haven't quite managed to extend it to free agency.
Okay.
Non-contact injuries just suck. Football's a violent game. If a guy launches himself through somebody's knee, it's not fun. It's a shame for the guy that goes down. We're going to miss out on that player for a year, for maybe more. But you understand it happens. This is a collision sport. Contact is inevitable, and guys are going to break things. The human body is not supposed to be used as a weapon or a shield against weaponry. It's just inevitable it's going to happen. But the ones that really suck is when a guy is just going about his daily business as if, nothing has changed, and his body just gives out. It just goes, no, not today, son, and something snaps. And you don't budget for your own body deciding to betray you and collapse in a heap randomly. And those are always the worst ones as well. When you look at Teddy Bridgewater, who's still trying to battle back from a complete non-contact freak injury a year ago, it's ended careers. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because Sidney Jones from Washington, one of the top cornerback prospects in this draft, was going through his pro day and goes down. And I can't remember, do you remember what it was? An ACL or an Achilles? Achilles gone. And that's a really significant injury for a cornerback. It's one of those parts of your body that dictates explosion and some serious kind of high level biomechanics and agility and speed and that kind of thing. Exactly what you need as a cornerback. And right before this guy is going to get one of the biggest paydays of his life and, secure himself financially, he has his draft stock torpedoed by his own body buckling from under him at random.
Awful. That's the first instance of that, though, I can really remember at a pro day.
Yeah.
It happens a lot when you're actually in a game or even celebrating, like Lamar Houston or what's his face,
Stephen
the other.
Tulloch.
Yeah, Stephen Tulloch celebrating after a play, but I can't remember an instance where a guy got actually injured, to where he's going to miss the next year at a pro day or at, one of those sort of showcases after the season or the combine, something like that. Just, you feel awful for the guy.
Yeah. So I hate those non-contact injuries. Just the worst.
So the human body is what grinds Sam's gears.
Not the human body as much as its failings. It's failings for no reason. Like I say, if something, if it fails because someone took their shoulder pad to your knee, fine. If it fails just because you planted left and went to cut normally, it's got no good excuse for that.
I 100% agree. Another good grind your gears. Another one I can get on board with. All right, let's move on to the 5. What everyone was waiting for, the 5 worst deals, and one position represented fairly heavily on this list. And number 1, right off the bat, doesn't take rocket scientists to put this one at number 1. I'll say Matt Khalil, 5 years, $55.5 million. He hasn't been good since he was a rookie. There's just no real debating that at this point.
No, he hasn't. But here's the thing, right? So everyone's going to have this at the top of our list. We've had it at the top of our list. We've already hammered it on the website. I'm gonna try and defend it.
Okay.
Because, like you said, Matt Khalil has been good. And he was...
Yes.
That rookie season, to be as good as he was as a rookie is really impressive. Most rookie tackles, as we're kind of learning the more we do this, don't do well. Even the guys that are going to be excellent NFL players, as rookies, they tend to struggle pretty badly. And Matt Khalil did actually really well as a rookie. Graded well as both a pass blocker and a pass protector. I think played every single snap that year, didn't miss a snap, only allowed 3 sacks all season. That was some serious upside he hinted at. And since then, he's kind of gone through a list of injuries that have kind of prevented him from maintaining weight and generally kind of getting himself off the rails. And the other thing that's interesting is that Carolina does have this history of reclaiming players that looked dead and buried by the time they made it all the way to the Panthers. You think of guys like Roman Harper, who we had completely written off by the time he left New Orleans because of the play. We hadn't just decided he was done, like his play was suggesting he was done. Michael Oher played significantly better.
Yeah, Michael Oher, definitely.
In Carolina. Kurt Coleman was a guy that didn't look any great shakes in Philadelphia, suddenly winds up in Carolina, looks way better. That team seems to have a way of getting the best out of players, whether it's playing to the things that they do well, identifying what their weaknesses are and identifying what their strengths are and kind of tailoring things to that, or whether they've just kind of got lucky in a sequence of figuring out that this guy has been beat up for the past 4 years. It's probably not going to continue for 5, 6, and 7. They have got a history of turning these guys around. So it's a move that certainly it isn't justified based on his last 3 years of play, but they're clearly not paying him based on the last 3 years of play. They're paying him on what they think the next three are going to be.
Yeah, so that rookie season you said, 27 pressures that year he allowed all season long in a full season, didn't miss a single snap. The next 3 years after that, he only missed 9 total snaps. So he was still playing full time, but allowed over 50 pressures, averaged over 50 pressures per season. So just night and day from the guy we saw as a rookie. Can he get back there? That's the thing. I don't know how exactly he did have injuries, but I don't know how exactly you go from as bad as he's been the last 4 years to back to that level. I don't know. We'll see if they can recapture it. But again, you're paying a lot for first round pedigree, 1 season of productive play. And yeah, I just can't get on board with it. But it could come back to be a good deal. So we'll see. Number 2, this just speaks to the tackle market. That was just crazy. If you are 6'4" right now in high school, weigh over 220 pounds, work on your pass sets right now. Start eating, just because it's unbelievable. You will make, if you can pass protect at even an average level in the NFL right now, you're going to make over $10 million a year. That's just the going rate for a tackle that's anywhere near above average. I know coming out of high school, Eric Armstead, the defensive end right now for the 49ers, who was a first-round pick, everyone wanted him to be an offensive tackle, and he played offensive tackle in high school and had those sort of skills, but he didn't want to play offensive line because, it's like playing basketball and only getting to play defense. It has to be so much less fun than defensive line. But if Eric Armstead were to switch to offensive tackle right now, he'd probably get $10 million a year from someone. That's how desperate teams are for tackle help. And that's how desperate the Chargers were when they signed Russell Okung to a 4-year, $53 million deal with $25 million guaranteed. That's like 1A and 1B for me, the Matt Khalil deal and the Okung for the 5 worst year.
And what's really interesting is there were so many of these deals. Like every single tackle seemed to get paid crazy money. So, as much as you want to kind of hammer on each one of these deals individually, obviously that's what the market was somehow for players that weren't that good or haven't been that good for an extended period of time. And the Russell Okung thing is even more fun because he's his own agent. So they didn't even it. So initially that was reported at being, was it 5-year, $53 million. But initially it was said that only 13.5 of it was guaranteed, which was kind of like the last deal he signed that looked monstrous from the overall numbers, but actually just a minuscule fraction of that was guaranteed, and they ended up being able to cut him loose pretty quickly. But it turns out Russell actually did himself a pretty good job this time. He got $25 million guaranteed out of the Chargers.
Yeah, he justified being his own agent. I mean, I think that's. Well, look, I don't know how much he saved, but yeah,
I think 4% is the standard cut for an agent. So, what is that? 4% of 25 million. Come on, I'm not good at maths. You do it for me.
I did. Okay, so 4% of 53, if he does play over the entire contract, is over $2 million, 2.12. So if he plays out his entire deal, he saved over himself $2 million, which
there you go. It's a serious
nice little chunk. Yeah, not bad there. But that's easily number 2 in my mind. So number 3, we'll move on to Akeem Spence, the defensive tackle from Tampa Bay, signed with Detroit. Not a big deal, 3 years, $9 million, but he's not even an upgrade from what they had last year in terms of he's not a good player. He's legitimately every year of his career.
He's one of the guys that Tampa Bay have tried in the nose tackle spot next to Gerald McCoy and have unsuccessfully managed to get quality play out of him. So since kicked him to the curb. So there's a bunch of guys that get signed in this free agent period where you're like, it's not a huge amount of money, but I don't know that there's an amount of money that would make me want that guy on my roster.
The whole point of free agency is, to add talent. You want talent. Just signing bodies does you no good. You might as well draft a guy in the 5th round and let him play in there because it's not going to be any different than what Spence gave for Tampa Bay the last 4 years.
Yeah. So one of those guys that I think is in a similar kind of mold is Super Bowl MVP Malcolm Smith, a linebacker who was signed with the San Francisco 49ers, who have an absolute boatload of money to be throwing around, so they can kind of afford it. But I don't know what you could possibly have seen in Malcolm Smith game basically since the Super Bowl. He actually looked quite promising earlier in his career for the Seahawks in that Seahawks defense. had a Super Bowl MVP game,
Well,
albeit
I think
one
you
that
just,
may not have
I was going to
deserved
say, I
to
think
win
you
MVP.
just hit it. You just hit it right on the head. The San Francisco 49ers are running the Seahawks defense now. They basically just said scheme familiarity. This guy knows it. That's why they paid him, I'm guessing.
But even like, so, I mean, I can understand it if the guy looked really good in that scheme and then left and wasn't as successful somewhere else. But he was bad in that scheme the last year he played in it. I mean, the Seahawks got rid of him for a reason. He then wound up, in Oakland last year, didn't look particularly good, especially in coverage. And he basically just hasn't, I mean, the Super Bowl was the highlight of his career and will almost certainly remain the highlight of his career.
When you have that much money to play around with and you're the 49ers, get legitimate talent on your roster. Don't go scraping for guys to plug in to fill holes. That's not gonna push you over the top. You're not a year away from, competing for a Super Bowl. You're 2 or 3 years away at least. Get legitimate talent if you have this cap space that's going to be there for the next 5 to 6 years and it's going to be legitimately good. Don't just, sign a bunch of low value signings. That's not going to do low guys to plug into holes. That's really not going to do much for you at this point.
And they signed him to a 5-year, $24.5 million deal with $13 million in guarantees. I mean, there's no way he's ever going to justify that contract. It seems nuts.
No, yeah, you're telling me. I mean, we're on the same page here. I completely agree. The next one, it's just the Rams paying Robert Woods 5 years, $39 million. It's just not the kind of guy that's going to move the needle for your passing offense. Well, he's a number 2.
Look how much money you now have tied up in Robert Woods and Tavon Austin.
Yeah, get a legitimate playmaker. Go get Alshon Jeffrey. Pay that $5 million more for a year to get a guy is good, instead of a guy who's been a career number 2 and a fairly average one at that.
I don't know exactly how much money a year they have tied up in those two, but neither one of those two guys has ever gained more than 700 receiving yards. 700. Terrell Pryor gained 1,000 in his first season playing wide receiver with 6 different Browns quarterbacks throwing him the ball. Like, that's a terrible statistic. I mean, people talk, so one of the things that everybody said when Robert Woods signed is, the thing that everybody tweeted, Ian Rappaport, all those guys, was best blocking receiver on the market. They're like, well, okay, 1, that's probably not true. 2, even if it was, if that's the first thing you can say about your new receiver that you're paying many, many millions of dollars to, something has gone wrong.
Yeah, I remember Daniel Jeremiah saying about when they were drafting in Philadelphia, not once did they ever bring up the blocking of a wide receiver, because
it's a bonus.
You don't draft a guy because of that. You don't sign a guy in free agency because he blocks well as a runner. It's nice to have, but he needs to get his ass open and he needs to beat coverage first and foremost. And Robert Woods just has not been that guy consistently over the course of his career. So I don't know where you're going with that signing.
It's another one where it's a huge amount of projection. I mean,
it was purely a scramble to try to get Goff weapons when, go get him a legitimate weapon. Go get him a guy is when you have that much space that they have. Don't start getting cheap at that point.
The only glimmer of hope I can find for it is that Robert Woods last season was targeted over 10 times twice. And in those 2 games, he had 89 yards and 162 yards and caught more than 70% of those targets. So the couple of times that they have really used him as their main receiving target, he stepped up. But you're asking a lot of projection to expect him to do that week in, week out against teams' best cornerbacks, which is what he's going to have to do now.
Definitely agree. Let's keep it moving. On to number 5. I had Drake Kirkpatrick, 5 years, $52 million. I saw this one coming from a mile away because he didn't play terribly last year. He was actually down the stretch somewhat good, allowed a career low completion percentage against. It was a large improvement from the year before, and he has that first round pedigree. Allowed a completion percentage against of 59%, fairly good, but he did it for about 8 weeks last year, and nothing prior to that in his career suggested he's the guy who's going to continue to do that. And for $3 million more, you could have gotten a year. You could have gotten AJ Boye. So I don't know where you're going with this signing.
So the Bengals rolled into free agency with Andrew Whitworth, scheduled to leave the team. By far their best tackle, basically the only competent starting tackle they have. Kevin Zeitler, about to hit free agency, pretty top quality guard, not quite as elite as Whitworth, but very good. And Dre Kirkpatrick, who at his very, very best has been average. And Kirkpatrick was the guy they went hell for leather to make sure they didn't lose. I don't understand that.
I mean, I understand prioritizing cornerback over offensive line when you get the ball out quickly as an offense already. You know, it might not be the most important position if you have playmakers surrounding Dalton, but sign a legit again. Going back to my thing. If you're gonna sign someone you know is a legit talent. Sign someone who's been an elite level talent and just pay that extra money. Pay the extra money for that sort of security that you know you got a good player. With Trey Kirkpatrick, you have no clue. There's 1 year of somewhat competent play at corner after, you know, multiple years of not even close to competent play. I don't know. That's my biggest gripe is the mid-level deals for guys that just haven't shown that they are ready to be, you know, high-level players.
Yeah, unless they find a quality starting tackle in the draft somewhere, I think we're going to find out pretty quickly just how important tackle play is to any offense, even one that gets the ball out pretty quickly with no Whitworth there, given the guys that they now have scheduled to start in his place.
Oh gosh.
That offensive line suddenly looks like a disaster.
Whew. Yeah, that one's going to be fun to watch next year, I'll just say, to see how Dalton holds up with that, because he crumbled under pressure. His passer rating in 2015 was like 94 under pressure. Last year, it dropped back down to where, you know, it usually goes for quarterbacks, which is in the 50s. And that explained about their whole season, their offensive turnaround. And because he was under a lot more pressure with the guy whose name escaped me on right tackle there.
Boye.
Yeah. Cedric Boye. And now it's going to be him and Jake Fisher at tackle. So look out, pray for Dalton. All right, on to the most improved teams now. Those are the best and worst contracts. Now,
we're going to get through my last one. It was the one deal that I want to talk about in this whole thing is the Houston Texans basically making history in creating the first cap dump trade in NFL history. They essentially paid the Cleveland Browns a second-round pick in 2018 just to take Brock Osweiler's contract off their books. That is how bad that deal was that they signed a year ago. And I cannot get my head around them doing that. I think there's a certain degree of credit you can give the team for realizing quite how horrendous that deal was. It's like, look, this is an absolute catastrophe. We need to get rid of it, and we need to get rid of it now. But the way that they've done it is, I think, the worst way you could possibly come up with to execute getting rid of him. I mean, you could have cut him. That would have been a real pain to the salary cap. It would have been a real issue financially. But you could have done it, and you wouldn't have had to give away a second-round pick next year to do that. The other thing you could have done is what the Browns are looking at doing, which is convert half of the contract you owe him, the $16 million or whatever it is for 2017. Pay him half of that now as a roster bonus, and then the new team if you trade him, the new team is only on the hook for half that deal. It suddenly becomes a much more attractive contract to rid yourself of. So the Browns are potentially paying like $16 million to get a second round pick next year, and then they might flip the guy by just adjusting his contract a little bit, paying another $9 million in cash, and getting more picks for the guy. Literally doing nothing, just flipping him like a used car that you just paint the wheels of. It's just crazy.
If there's never been in the history of the NFL a more win now move than that. Literally giving a pick for cap space, mortgaging the future for this year's cap space. Like it's the definition of a win now move.
And it's not like they were hard up against the cap. It might make a little sense if they had $1 million to play with and they really needed to make a move. Romo was out there. That was the only way they were going to get him. They already had $31 million worth of cap space. It's not like this was a team desperately hurting for the financial wiggle room to make something happen.
Well, here's the thing. If they don't get Romo now, how bad does that trade look? Because, there's not a quarterback out there maybe they could sign Cutler, but that's not really going to do it for you as an offense. if they don't get Romo, they are
the two things. Yeah,
that's one of the worst trades I've ever seen, because you're back at square one at quarterback, and you just gave away a second-round pick for nothing.
There's two things that could make this trade look even worse. One, Romo gets released, becomes an open free agent, and somebody else signs him. And two, if the Browns do manage to flip Osweiler for a profit, people are talking about them not even necessarily needing to adjust that contract to be able to get something for him. If they get a pick back for a guy that the Texans paid them a second-round pick to take away, that looks terrible. The other thing,
no one's going to take Osweiler, though. That
I wouldn't have thought so. I would think they would need to adjust that contract. But even so, like if they eat $9 million now, just pay the guy another $9 million. It's going to hurt, but whatever. And then they manage to, flip him for like a 5th-round pick. It still looks even worse for Houston. The other thing that would be pretty hilarious is if the Browns just cut him straight away and took the pick. Just, now we can move on.
No, what I want to see happen is Tony Romo get released, and then the Browns just overload a deal at Romo, steal him away from the Texans, just basically troll the Texans back for the pick. I mean, no reason the Browns should sign him, but would just absolutely just end the Texans. That ends basically the GM Rick Smith's their tenure.
That would be harsh.
All right, that deal was fun. I mean, if I'm the Browns fans right now, that is a fantastic deal for them. Yeah. They came away like bandits with that deal. You have the cap space, might as well use it. I mean, the 49ers are still sitting there with $97 million in cap space. Do something with it. Like, at least the Browns are,
and they've still got 60-something million. Like they used $16 million to buy a pick and invested big in free agency, and they still have $60-odd million worth of cap space.
They're poised to be actually good at some point in the future, which is
they find the QB.
I was gonna say, which is not something you could say in the last anytime in the last 5 years, I'd say. But I think they're looking like 2019. They could be in the playoffs again. We'll see. That moves us on though to the most improved teams of free agency. Who's improved the most? Which team's gotten better over the last 4 days? And at number one, I don't think this one's even a debate at this point. I think the Jaguars have easily improved the most.
They keep winning free agency. At some point, it's got to actually translate to the field. I agree, though. It looks good. Calais Campbell, AJ Bouye, were both two of our top, 15 free agents. You wanted Bouye higher, so potentially that's an even better deal. It looks outstanding for them on paper. Barry Church is another really solid addition to that secondary. Like I say, the only concern is that they've won free agency a couple of times now, and it just hasn't actually mattered.
Yeah, I don't really understand the Calais Campbell deal. I mean, he plays basically the same position as Malik Jackson. I mean, he can kick into one technique sometimes, but that's not something you're going to want him to do, regularly. They're both basically 3-4 techniques going to line up over the tackle sometimes. So I'm not sure how they get both of those guys on the field. But, I mean, talent is talent. If you find a way to do it in their scheme, those guys are both fantastic at what they do in terms of rushing the passer and stopping the run. So that's an improved D-line. And then A.J. Bouye and Jalen Ramsey immediately becomes one of the best cornerback duos in the NFL. So if this defense is not one of the top 5 to top 10 defenses in the NFL next year, I'd be very, very surprised.
I assume that Calais Campbell probably ends up playing the defensive end, the 5-tech in that defense, the position that Tyson Alualu's been playing, and you leave Malik Jackson where he was, and they've kind of they've actually had decent enough nose tackle play the past couple of years. Plus, they've been kicking the tires on Dontari Poe. He's looking for that 1-year contract, so it doesn't sound like they're going to play Calais Campbell or Malik Jackson as their 1-tech kind of nose tackle guy. R.B. Jones has been quite good there. I think they'll move Campbell out to the defensive end spot, and that becomes a really interesting alignment.
Yeah, so the Jags, number one. I had number two, I had the Browns, just with how much they've improved their offensive line. Swapping out Britt for Pryor, it's probably a lateral move, but I think adding Zeitler and Treader to that interior offensive line, it's going to do wonders for whoever they throw out behind that offensive line of quarterback next year, just in terms of time that they're going to have. We talked about earlier this year how much I thought offensive line play helps, a rookie quarterback get going. We saw it with Dak Prescott. We saw it with Carson Wentz when Lane Johnson was healthy. I think that for a young quarterback. So Browns making moves to improve their offensive line. They definitely listen to that podcast.
Yeah, that's huge. And if Sean Coleman ends up being a half-decent player, if they can just solve that right tackle problem, and I don't even mean get a really good player there, I just mean have a guy that's passable, then you have, 4/5 of a really good offensive line and one guy who's at least not undoing the good work of everybody else. That suddenly becomes a really useful offensive line.
All right, number 3, I had the LA Rams, just in terms of Whitworth being an upgrade there at left tackle. I'd want to switch this now in retrospect from what I've seen. I'd swap the Eagles into number 3 with Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith. Just with how bad their wide receivers were last year, that's a monster upgrade for them. So in retrospect, I think the Eagles probably got better than the Rams, but both of them, I think, improved here.
Does Torrey Smith actually improve that roster?
It can't make it worse, is all I'll say.
True. I like Detroit. I think Detroit have made a couple of nice moves. TJ
I agree
Lang,
with Detroit as well.
One of the best guards.
That was my 5th. So.
Who's the other offensive line? Ricky Wagner is the tackle they signed. So I think they've made a couple of, again, targeting the offensive line, made a couple of really nice moves there.
That could be a top 5 O-line in all football next year. Definitely only left guard really in question at the moment in terms of, are you going to get quality play out of Laken Tomlinson or Graham Glasgow now? So,
can't believe you call him Glasgow.
Okay, yeah. How would you say it? Because I know Gordon doesn't agree with his pronunciation.
That's because it's wrong. The man's name is not Glasgow. It's Glasgow. That's what the city it's named after is pronounced. That's how it's pronounced. I don't know how you somehow bastardize that into Glasgow, because that's just not.
That's how he says it, though.
Well, he's clearly wrong. Look, the man is ill-informed how his name should be pronounced. I think someone should help him out.
All right, well, Glasgow, probably your starting left guard the way Tomlinson's been playing, but we'll see next year. I like the Lions offensive line, like what they've done as well. So that'll do it for us. Make sure to check out the Draft Pass again. Like I said, profootballfocus.com/draftpass17. You'll enjoy it. We'll be back next week to talk any more free agency deals, anything that comes up here. Maybe look ahead to how this stuff impacts draft and whatnot. So we'll talk to you guys then. Have a good one.